I think in the 50s, people didn't even consider themselves a minority group. They didn't even think of disability rights as two words that went together. It was really extraordinary. My vocational rehabilitation counselor came in and talked to me for a while. His recommendation was that I go to a sheltered workshop to spend my life making baskets.
There was a belief that if you had a disability, you didn't have any desire to live a life. You didn't have the goals and the dreams that somebody non-disabled had. There were many stereotypes, many myths, and many fears about something different. There were fears about people who weren't, quote, normal. That's a word that I grew up hating because you always heard about the handicapped kids and the normal kids, and they create enormous barriers.
Hello, you're watching another edition of Talk Vietnam. Now, you've just seen extracts from Lives Worth Living, a film by U.S. director Eric Neudel. Now, people living with disabilities are one of the largest minorities in the United States, and this documentary is the first television history recounting their struggles for equal rights. Now, the film follows the formation and journey of the disabilities movements, the disabilities rights movement, and through the signing of the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990. And now the movement scored one of the biggest civil rights victories in American history, and we're very lucky today to have Eric here in our studio to talk more about the film as well as the struggles of the disabilities movement in the United States. Thank you very much, Eric, for joining us here today. How are you?
Very well. I'm really happy to be here. I'm actually quite honored to be in Vietnam and able to talk to people here.
Yes. We'll talk beginning now with your film, Lives Worth Living. I was very touched by the extracts, the different scenes, especially the beginning scene with the first character. His name is Fred Fay, and the scene of him just on the wheel bed with the mirror trying to control his way through life, basically. Can you share a little bit more about this particular character?
This is a fellow who is the inspiration for the film itself. I had met him by chance at an award ceremony where he was receiving an award. He had lost his speech, so he had to talk just extemporaneously. And he was just magnificent in what he was talking about. Very philosophical, very powerful speaker. So I decided right at that moment, I have to make a film about this fellow. It took about 3 seconds.
3 seconds
to
just make that decision.
He was that powerful, you know, it was just that meaningful. He was a genius. So he had complete confidence in himself. And it was odd to see somebody who could only move on a wheel bed and had very limited control of his body be so confident about himself and his being. It's not just his mind, but his soul. He had control of that. And he understood life in a way that I could see in 3 seconds. I need to learn from this man. Yeah. After I decided to make a film about him, I started visiting him, and every Thursday I would go and talk to him. And at first I thought I'd make a film about his life.
Yes.
But then I realized he didn't want me to make a film about his life. He wanted me to make a film about what he cared about. And what he cared about was this, at the time, very obscure movement, the disability rights movement in the United States. A movement that people did not pay much attention to at the time, but obviously had this very important result in the United States. It truly changed the landscape of the United States. So I wondered about this a lot, because how could something so important be ignored? And I realized it was because people with disabilities had been ignored themselves. One of the points of the film is that you have to have both activism. You have to raise your voice and let people know what's wrong, and then you have to do something about it.
Yes.
And what do?
Be the change.
You make a change and you put it into black and white in law, and when that law is enforceable, it changes attitudes. Anyhow, Fred Fay, this wonderful man, taught me this, and he told me this story during the course of this year that I just talked to him every Thursday, and it became clear that I could put these little stories he was telling me together into one coherent, beautiful little story about people affecting change, really changing things.
I now lift my pen to sign this Americans with Disability Act and say, let the shameful wall of exclusion finally come tumbling down. God bless you all.
Having been told for so long how powerless we were, and here we were with the President of the United States signing this document that was our Emancipation Proclamation.
This fight of ending discrimination in the area of disability is one that will continue to go on for decades.
I think the future is the revolution that empowers every single human being on a custom basis. And I think it's the next step for humanity that is necessary to move from the last stages of barbarism into a golden age of science and democracy. We're not going to have science and democracy until each person is empowered to live their God-given potential. And it's not going to happen by accident. It's going to happen when we make it happen.
What was special about this film is that there was no outside narration at all. The whole film was told by the characters themselves, by the 21 characters. Can you tell us about this particular technique that you used in the film?
That was a major point for us from the very beginning in making the film, partially because people with disabilities had no voice.
Yes.
In the context of all this opinion that people with disabilities are less than and don't have a voice, don't need a voice, just go right in people's faces with it.
Yes. You need a film that would give them that voice.
Yeah, just give them that voice. So if I had a narrator, if I hired a narrator, it would have been this nameless person who would have given facts and figures and that sort of thing. But there's so much more to be gained by just hearing the voice or seeing the subtlety of people's speech, their ideas, to let them propel the story. But the trick for me was to put these 21 people, I tried all 31 in the film, but I couldn't do it because it was too many characters.
Yes. And I believe you needed to tell a coherent story combining these 21.
That's it. That was the hard part, is like, how do I do this?
Yes.
Because they have to pick up from each other and propel the story along. And the only other unit of change that I had was stock footage, which was really useful. But also in this subject area, the mobility issue plays a role. So you can't really film people with disabilities in sort of action scenes very much.
Yes.
And also this was an intellectual film, so it was all about ideas. So I needed action to make the film have this kind of feeling to it, that there was something going on and there was progression in history.
Yes.
So I used the stock footage as the action footage, and I used the people commenting on it as the narrator.
As the narrator.
And that flow made it a gentle film.
What are some of the other challenges that you encountered during the process of making this film?
Well, the most important challenge was that nobody believed in it, really. We got some money, and money was always an issue, but to do a film like this, it requires a lot of stock footage.
Yes.
And it's expensive to make a film. In general, it's expensive to make a film. There's travel, there's, hotels. We didn't stay in very good hotels, but
I think the time alone it's a big investment of time. I mean, you spent 5 years making this film. So that alone, I believe, is a big investment already.
Yes, and it makes you really poor.
Yes.
When you're doing it. I knew that this was a good thing to do. It just was good to the bone, and I needed to complete it, especially for Fred, who was very ill during this whole process. And my partner, Allison Gilkey, who's my producer, she saw the meaning of this as well. So we had this conviction, this perseverance that no matter what anybody thought, this was important. And that is the hardest part of the whole thing, is just staying with it, having the perseverance, knowing that what you're doing is important and that it has meaning.
Yes. Well, let's talk about your visit here in Vietnam. Now, during his visit here, Mr. Eric Neudel has shown his film Lives Worth Living here in the country, as well as he has also had conversations with local people living with disabilities. We'll take a look at that in the following.
In the northern province of Thái Nguyên, Eric Neudel and Allison Gilkey have been holding screenings of Vietnamese women with disabilities who are members of the Photo Voice project. Many of them have been involved in social activities, and the film urges them to try harder and be more aware of their rights.
Tôi thấy là rất bổ ích cho những người Việt Nam chúng tôi, mà nhất là những cái vùng sâu vùng xa là không được tiếp cận với xã hội nhiều. Chẳng hạn như tôi ấy, tôi chưa được đi học nhưng mà tôi cứ tham gia xã hội thì tôi cũng mạnh bạo hơn đấy. Thế còn thì có những người mà tôi thấy là họ sống rất khép kín, cho nên là cũng thấy họ thiệt thòi quá so với những cái gì mà họ đáng được hưởng.
The Photo Voice Project is an innovative program that trains people with disabilities in photography and gives them the chance to document their own lives, perhaps even to find employment in the field. According to Bùi Đăng Thanh, the project's instructor, the film screening has inspired his teammates.
Lớp đang đào tạo nhiếp ảnh như thế này, họ có được xem một cái bộ phim này là một cái tác động rất lớn. Tôi coi như một cái cú hích về mặt tinh thần đối với họ, để làm họ thay đổi chính bản thân họ, suy nghĩ chính bản thân họ, và họ cũng sẽ góp phần vào thay đổi cái quan điểm, cái tư duy, cái suy nghĩ của các nhà lãnh đạo đối với của quốc gia này đối với người khuyết tật.
Cái bộ phim này nó tác động rất là lớn, và đặc biệt là những cái nơi vùng sâu vùng xa, những cái vùng mà hạn chế về thông tin, hạn chế về trình độ nhận thức, hạn chế về rất nhiều thứ, mà họ được tiếp cận những cái này là cái điều rất là đáng quý.
Tears lie in the faces of the attendees today. Perhaps, deep in their minds, the essential message of the film is hitting home. This is all about the power of humanity and self-determination, and what one can accomplish against seemingly insurmountable obstacles.
Now, Eric, can you share with us, why is it that you have chosen to show Lives Worth Living here in Vietnam?
I was invited by the American Film Showcase, which is really a wonderful program which brings documentaries from the United States, meaningful documentaries, to people around the world. It's funded by the State Department of the United States. When they asked me to do it, I said, sure, I'd love to do this, because what I want to do is have the biggest possible impact with people around the world, maybe get this idea into people that we're all created equal.
Yes.
And to me, that serves everybody.
In terms of kind of some background information in Vietnam here, in 2010, the Vietnam National Assembly ratified the law on persons with disabilities, and also on the first day of 2011, this law took effect. Vietnam is trying very hard in order to push the struggle for equal rights for people living with disabilities, but of course, this has its drawbacks as well, and that struggle is still going on. How about other places that you've been in the world? Do you think that this movement is going on in other parts of the world as well?
I know it is, and I know that the destiny of this is it's just unstoppable. People are realizing that this is a very important issue, and that it affects so many people in the world. There's almost 1 billion people in the planet with disabilities. 1 out of 6, 7. In the United States, it's 60 million people. How can you ignore such a giant minority? And so I know that as the world unfolds in its movement out of barbarism into
Yes.
a more civilized, compassionate world, which it will do, that this is inevitable. We will move toward a better world, and I think people in this world know that they have to do that because it's not possible anymore to survive as a planet unless we understand other people in the world, and until we grant equal rights to people around the world. This is going to be a long struggle.
Yes.
But it will happen, and I see it as inevitable.
Any other barriers where, you know, you see that are evident now in U.S. society?
There's still barriers when it comes to attitudes. Anybody who's had a child with a disability or anyone who has a disability, they get it like that. They understand immediately.
Of course.
This is important. And this is one of the things that's moved me the most, is seeing the parents of children with disabilities. When I saw how much they love their child and how much that child means to them, and yet that child is being bullied, that's a problem, a big problem. And people who have disabilities are 2.5 times, almost 2.5 times more likely to be bullied in the American school system, and this has got to change.
Well, talking about raising awareness, during his visit, Eric Neudel has been able to share his films and also talk to students both in Cần as well as Thái Nguyên about this film, Lives Worth Living. So we'll take a look at his meetings in the following.
Thái Nguyên University today welcomed special guests Eric Neudel and his partner Alison Gilkey, who co-directed and produced the PBS documentary Lives Worth Living. The students were all amazed by the film, which is the first television documentary on the struggle for equal rights by people with disabilities in the U.S., one of the largest minorities in a country that numbers around 60 million people.
Em thực sự là rất ấn tượng khi bộ phim có thể gộp được nhiều tư liệu như vậy, tại vì nhiều hình ảnh em thấy thật sự là rất xa rồi, nhưng mà vẫn có thể tập hợp lại để có thể làm nên một bộ phim rất hay như vậy.
The film begins in a post-World War II era, when the status of people with disabilities began to change rapidly. It ends with a dramatic battle for the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990, one of the most important pieces of civil rights legislation in America's history. Powerful stock footage haunted the students, but it was the humanitarian aspect of the film that changed the mindsets about disabled communities.
Em có thấy khó quên nhất là hình ảnh của một cô bé bò lên cầu thang ấy ạ. Em thấy cô bé đấy có một sức mạnh rất là phi thường, một nghị lực rất phi thường và em rất là khâm phục cô bé ấy. Và thông điệp này muốn đưa đến người xem là tức là quyền bình đẳng ạ. Quyền bình đẳng với tất cả mọi người là đều là như nhau ạ. Và người khuyết tật thì cũng có quyền được sống như tất cả những người bình thường ạ.
Khi mà chưa xem những cái thước phim này thì em có nhận định sai lầm về những cái người khuyết tật. Nếu mà em gặp họ ngoài đường thì em sẽ tránh họ ra. Nhưng mà sau khi xem những cái thước phim này thì em thấy nhận định của mình đã sai lầm và em nghĩ là em sẽ thay đổi.
It took 5 years for Eric and Alison to make the 54-minute film, but that 54 minutes has helped raise awareness among young students about people with disabilities, and to some extent, their efforts have paid off.
You've had a great experience meeting with the students in Cần and Thái Nguyên. What was the message that you wanted to convey with them through your talks with them?
You can change the world. You can make this world a better place, and you should not settle for this world as it is. It can be made better. And even someone as, along in the years as I am, still has that belief that we can change the world. And I don't want them to ever lose that. I want them to make this world better and to see themselves in perspective, to know that real happiness in life comes from helping other people. It doesn't come from gathering things up.
For Vietnam, even despite these laws that I have mentioned in the struggle in itself, a sense of discrimination still exists, and that is one of the biggest obstacle to kind of pushing this struggle forward. How about in the United States, the issue of discrimination, of kind of setting, as you said, looking down on people living with disabilities and not just seeing them as the people that they are. How is this issue going, or what is the situation like currently?
The big push now is for employment. What we've seen is that whenever people with disabilities become part of something, then they just become another person. Like since 1975 in the United States, for example, students had to be included. Students with disabilities had to be included with other students. They had to be part of everyday life, mainstreamed within school systems.
Yes.
Once children who did not have disabilities were with children who did, the differences just disappeared. They've all accepted that disability is part of life, but there's still discrimination against it, and it's very difficult because discrimination is based on ignorance.
Yes.
It's connected to ignorance, not understanding. So when ignorance is one of these things that is very difficult to break, because the people who are ignorant or hold ignorant ideas don't want to do the work. So this process takes a long time, decades, to break people down, but it will break down. And it is breaking down, and that's what I see all over the United States, is that this issue, especially with films like this, it breaks down this ignorance.
Yes. Well, talking about sharing experience with younger filmmakers, during his visit here in Vietnam, Eric has also met with a number of filmmakers, younger filmmakers here in Vietnam, to share his experience of making films. So in the following, we'll take a look at their meetings.
And his life.
The exchange took place at a U.S. consulate in Ho Chi Minh City. Attendees were mainly independent Vietnamese filmmakers looking to gain experience from their foreign colleagues to improve the local film industry.
Cái khó khăn thì thực sự cũng rất là nhiều. Một là khó khăn về cái ý tưởng về đề tài thực hiện. Thứ hai là về cái ngân sách để mình thực hiện. Và thứ ba là về giống như là cái sự giúp đỡ của một số cái ban ngành lớn khi mà về vấn đề mà mình liên hệ cũng rất khó, và tài liệu nữa, và những cái tài liệu xưa cũ thì cũng tìm rất là khó.
Vấn đề lớn nhất hiện nay là cái đầu ra. Ví dụ như khi mà có một cái ý tưởng tốt, khi mà mình có một cái kịch bản tốt, nhưng mà để mình tìm một mình bỏ kinh phí ra mình sản xuất đi, nhưng mà mình tìm một cái đầu ra để mà ví dụ tìm tới nhà đài hay một cái đơn vị nào đó người ta chấp nhận lấy cái phim của mình để người ta phát, đó là một cái cản trở lớn.
Eric Neudel was happy to share his 40 years of experience with his Vietnamese colleagues as a documentary filmmaker.
What I was trying to do was tell them what a real-life experience is in making a documentary like this, that it's really a long, difficult process, that you get very tired, and it's important to stay with it and believe in yourself, because if you have an independent idea, probably nobody else understands it at the time. But that's the thing about ideas, new ideas. It's very important to present new ideas, because those are the things that change the world and make the world better.
This was Eric Neudel's first time in Vietnam. He came at the invitation of American Film Showcase, a project sponsored by the U.S. State Department that brings award-winning American documentary and independent filmmakers to different parts of the world. It shares films that are very American, but also have themes that are humane and universal.
In the U.S. Declaration of Independence, and even Ho Chi Minh said in the Vietnamese Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal. Films like this and programs like this help us to talk about values like that we share between our two countries.
The content of the film.
For Eric, the trip has helped him to learn more about his colleagues in Vietnam, as well as the landscape of independent filmmaking here.
I saw in talking to them this desire, this almost emerging world of independent thinking, that there are people who crave making their own films, and I could see in them that they want to know how to make films outside of the mainstream and to pursue their own ideas, their own individual ideas. And I really saw that today.
Now there are various definitions of what a documentary is. What makes a successful documentary? Is it good document?
No, good story. The thing that makes everything, the way I believe the human mind works, is that it works in understanding, it understands life through stories. As I explained to young filmmakers, you have to, in the beginning, make a promise to your viewers that you will surprise them, and then you must surprise them, and then in the end, you must pay off. You must make sure that they're coming away with a feeling, some feeling, a sense of completion. They've seen something, and they really understand what they've seen. And that's a very, very important part of it, is to make something cohesive that fits together. And stories are the key.
Yes. I think what is difficult is that how do you know if you have the right story?
You feel it. There's no problem with that. You feel it. If you don't have that part of yourself, you probably shouldn't do documentaries.
In terms of the technique of making documentary films, are there certain trends and styles now in the current wave of making documentary films in the U.S. that filmmakers here in Vietnam should be aware of?
Now you have sort of the cult of personality. So people are following personalities as a documentary form. Yes. They're also, separate from that, they're also following issues. So there might be something that's very heavily narrated, but following an issue, which can only be covered really in narration. Or there may be another film, I think these are the two styles that are dominant right now, where you have a great character, someone has a lot to say and
yes.
to deliver, and you follow that person. And through identification with that person, you develop those attitudes yourself. You see through things into that attitude. So those are the two forms I see right now. There are many forms, nicely for documentaries. Many of the different ideas about how to do documentaries have been developed.
Yes.
So it's really a wonderful art form now.
How do you keep yourself inspired over the years? I
think it's the feeling that there's so much to do. There's so much in the world that needs to change, and there's so much knowledge on one hand and so much ignorance on the other. And I'm pretty passionate about breaking down this ignorance. I don't think I could ever get tired of it. I think that's my nature, to really enjoy people and to really be learning from them all the time. Yes. So it's easy to be inspired because people are so inspiring.
Eric Neudel has been an editor in 3 out of the 13 episodes of Vietnam, A Television History, a production by the Public Broadcasting Service, or PBS, in the early 1980s. The series is considered the best television documentary that American filmmakers have ever made about the Vietnam War. Vietnam, A Television History won 6 Emmys, plus many other prestigious awards.
But we didn't go in there with the express purpose that this is a wonderful opportunity to show how great our weapons are and how much destructive power they possess. As a result of their being so entrenched, it required for us to bring maximum firepower at our disposal to eliminate them. But we were fortunate in that we did have the weapons that were capable of rooting the NVA and the Viet Cong out of their positions.
Mais vous savez, pour nous,
for us, you know, strategy is never purely military. Our strategy is always a general and integrated strategy, simultaneously military, political, and diplomatic. Thus, the Tet Offensive of 1968 obviously had an objective that was both military and political.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your involvement in the series as an editor?
When I joined the production, there was, I think, 6 editing rooms. There were 3 teams of people. There was a British team, a French team, and an American team. And the American team was kind of like, you had people on one side of the political spectrum, and
Yes.
then you had people on the
Democrat,
other.
Republican.
Yeah, you had the completely opposite opinions about this war. I think that more than any other series in my life, any other thing I worked on, that shaped the way I thought about things. It was a very perplexing. So my opinions about the war changed as I became more, as I said earlier, like neutral.
Or reaching as
I
much as possible.
went into a limbo with this. I wasn't American. I wasn't Vietnamese. I'm not sure exactly who I was, but I floated around with all the ideas of what happened. You asked me what haunts me earlier. Well, this is something that haunts me. I saw something very tragic in the decisions that had been made. I felt like I lived within that war for 3 years, and that the things I was seeing on the screen and asked to make sense of were changing me. That had a big effect on my life. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat sometimes. It was very haunting to go through this, and it was always debating, well, what really happened here? Well, that made me a better journalist.
You mentioned once that there was a sense of sadness that overwhelmed you at the end of your 3 years. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, it's never left me. I felt sad about that war since that time. I mean, I was sad about it before, but I was angry.
Why so?
Well, because I thought they were asking young men to go fight. There were 2 very different sides to this war. In the Vietnamese side, there was a national purpose. There had been colonial rule for a long time, and people in Vietnam, I think, wanted
independence.
Yeah, they wanted, just like in the United States. When we were a young country, or not even a country, we wanted our independence. We wanted to determine for ourselves where our nation was going. We wanted to make our own laws. We wanted to live, well, for better or worse, we wanted to live as we are, as a people in the United States. Well, I thought of Vietnam as a country that had the same right to determine its future. This was the post-colonial era. I felt that in the United States, people were asking us to go fight for an abstraction, some kind of idea that was an abstraction. But for the Vietnamese people, it wasn't an abstraction. It was real life.
It was a real purpose.
Yeah. And so you could see those 2 things very obviously playing out in the war itself.
Yes.
That you had a very dedicated group of people who really believed in what they were doing and were willing to withstand a tremendous amount of bombing and war, a lot of losses. And then on the other side, you had 58,000 American soldiers who lost their lives, and then how many wounded, maybe a couple 100,000 wounded from this, total force of almost 500,000 at one point. And I thought, wow, there's so much to do in this world. There's so much the United States could do in this world, being the superpower that it is. Why are we not doing that? Why are we doing this? So in reviewing the war, these feelings came up again. I don't think the people who conducted this war understood the nature of Vietnam. And that's what made me really sad.
Yes.
With some snipers, over. Everybody get off the middle of this LZ. Everybody move out. Get out there.
American strategists planned to use firepower to break the will of the enemy and make them talk peace on America's terms. It brought to bear the power of its industry and technology, and also its young men.
What really began to happen after a few months was that you could get as far as understanding that this was crazy. What was going on here was nuts. But you didn't dare begin to draw conclusions from that because they pointed in directions that were just terrifying. I mean, America might not be the guys on the white horses with the white hats. Maybe we shouldn't be in Vietnam. Maybe I've gotten my ass out here in the bushes for nothing. You can't think about that kind of stuff in a situation like that. For instance, it never occurred to me to quit. I laid out my rifle and said, I'm not going to do this. Somewhere lurking in the back of my mind was 20 years of making big rocks into little rocks. I knew when I went to Vietnam that I had to be there for 395 days. And if I was still alive when I got to the end of those 395 days, I could go home and forget the whole thing.
In terms of the technical aspects of the film, this is it's a series that required, as we said, a tremendous work, and it goes down to the very details. Let's take the sound, for example. Everything was very meticulous. Can you share with us these small details that made up the end success of the film?
Well, one of the things that I learned during this time, and was really important about that series, was that if we did something, it had to be completely accurate. So if we had, a lot of times you get footage and it doesn't have any soundtrack. It was just recorded silent. Yes. Or the soundtrack had been lost in some form. So what we would do is, you know, we'd replace the bullets, the sound of the bullets, the tanks, the vehicles that people used. But if we saw something on the screen, it had to be exactly, if we did a sound for that, it had to be exactly that machine, exactly that gun, exactly that bullet, exactly, you know, if it was a 50 millimeter Browning machine gun, we had to have a 50 millimeter Browning machine gun firing. There could be no leeway in this.
Very meticulous.
It was incredibly tedious. Every single detail that anybody said, anybody, even every word was analyzed to see if it was accurate. If there was a figure that was put out, it had to be accurate. Yes. Because we knew we were in dangerous territory. We were in a nation divided. That this country, America, was very split still about that war. And that the toll of this has played out in the United States in a way maybe Vietnamese people don't understand, but it has had a profound impact on American life and on the people who participated in that war. So when we were doing it, we knew we were in difficult territory. We knew we had to be accurate, and we knew almost unassailable, because there were plenty of people that were going to attack us from the left, from the right. We were going to get it.
Yes. So
but
there needed to be, you know, the best accuracy that you can possibly achieve, even if it meant going down to the sound of a single bullet.
So this accuracy was our saving grace. This is what takes the argument away.
Yes.
This is perfectly accurate. You cannot argue with what is accurate.
Do you think that accuracy is what is the main factor that makes up the success of the movie in the end?
Yes, I do. I think in every great documentary, it is accurate. And it is, there's a commitment to accuracy that makes the difference. I said this was the first time a series had been done like that. That was one of the distinguishing characteristics of it. It was accurate, beyond belief.
In the future, do you have any future plans that perhaps may include Vietnam?
Oh yeah, I would love to do something about the costs of this war in Vietnam, the real cost of war.
Yes.
So it costs us a certain amount of money to conduct the war. There's a tremendous amount of cost afterward. There's people that need to rehab.
Yes, post-traumatic stress disorders.
There's in the United States the people, the young men, and especially the young men who were soldiers in this war and may not have understood exactly what was happening to them. There's tens of thousands of them that have suffered from that war and have had difficulty living productive lives. So I think that kind of cost is worth covering.
Yes.
And I think the cost here is worth covering.
Agent Orange, unexploded ordnance, people living traumatized still because they lost so many families. And I'm sure the same in the U.S. as well. I mean, there are veterans who are living with the effects of Agent Orange passed down to their children, just like here in Vietnam.
Yes, and I'd like to cover that, and you know, but what I need to do is to do the same thing I did with Lives Worth Living and find the story, find a central character that can teach me this story.
What makes you most proud in your entire career since 1971 of being a filmmaker?
Well, I think a lot about how I started out. I was I came from a very poor family, and you know, I had I don't think anybody expected that I would be doing this. You know, I think I always wanted to be doing something important, but I didn't want the normal things people were pursuing. I didn't want to join in the society as just someone pursuing wealth. I thought there was something maybe more meaningful to do. So I was not an ambitious person. And I was very willing to take a job as a janitor in a television station. And the people who worked in the television station noticed that I was not ambitious, and therefore I was not a threat. So they kept promoting me. And that's how I got into the filmmaking part of my life. I went first from a janitor into a newsroom librarian, and then into a sound recordist for, you know, I worked as many of the people around the studio work. I worked as a cameraman on many productions, and I learned the craft. I felt like I had to have faith. And I had to have faith that my life would go in a certain way, and that even if I rejected standard definitions of success, that somehow my life would go where my heart was going, and that was really worth following. That was really worth doing something about. And that's what I did. I followed my heart, and I'm proud of doing that more than anything else. I'm proud of that. I felt like I never really wandered that far away from myself.
Well, thank you very much, Eric, for sharing your passion of documentary, your passion of changing the world. I believe it's inspiring to me as a young person pursuing television and broadcast and news, but also I'm sure very inspiring to other young people out there, either wanting to be a filmmaker or wanting to be a positive change to the society that they're living in.
Well, thank you very much for having me on this show. I really enjoyed it.
Yes, thank you very much. And that wraps up our edition of Talk Vietnam this time with U.S. filmmaker Eric Neudel. We hope that you have been inspired by the films that he has brought to Vietnam this time, and that you yourself have enjoyed this edition. Thank you very much, and we'll see you more next time here on Talk Vietnam.